Okay. This, by the way, is a thing you can take a picture of for these slides. So if you're interested, I'll leave this up for a second or two. And so how's everyone's dev days going so far? Sounds awesome. Yeah, I know we're at the end of the second day, getting ready to go ice skating, but I definitely appreciate everyone coming and listening to this talk. After looking at a lot of the other speakers, there's a lot of overlap here because just the nature of what I'm talking about and how it relates to FHIR. So I'm going to try and keep this talk nice and wide and shallow, which is the way I like doing talks. So a little bit about me. So my name's Brian Kaney. I'm from Boston at a company called Vermonster. We're working with FHIRly to try to bring FHIR, the FHIRly product line, Vonk and Simplifier and related products to the US. And you know, as they develop products in the space, so we've been providing services, building apps. We're app developers, and so this talk is definitely about the dev and dev days. So we're going to look at a lot of code. Also, a little bit of background: I co-run the local Boston FHIR meetup, and we've been growing over the years. We started about 4 people, and the last meetup happened to be at the new space that the smart folks have at Boston Children's at the Landmark Center, and we had almost 100 people. So if you're in the Boston area or traveling through, check out that meetup. This is another, I was thinking about doing a presentation with just 2D barcodes because kind of new to using them in slide decks. But this is a Stack Overflow survey. So I guess last year, they surveyed over 100,000 people, and they found that if you follow this link, you'll see some of the results. Node and JavaScript are pretty popular these days. And so if we're trying to kind of build a diverse ecosystem, why not try to make tools for large groups of people? Because the more brains kind of thinking about something, the better, and we shouldn't have language or tech stack get in the way of that. So this talk is, sorry. I don't know if anyone was around in 2012 when Gary Bernhardt did his Watt talk about JavaScript and all the little idiosyncrasies about JavaScript. So it might be odd that JavaScript has become so popular. We do a lot of work with a lot of companies, some startups and some very large companies, and we're seeing especially the kind of newer developers coming into the field. JavaScript, Node, TypeScript, that whole ecosystem is very popular. So let's try and make things as easy as possible for people to use FHIR, including the JavaScript Node community. So we're going to go through kind of a Jython-style JavaScript notebook. I'm going to show you some code that can show you how we can use some off-the-shelf libraries to do a lot of the things kind of within the FHIR ecosystem. So what I mean is if we look at kind of the left-hand side of this diagram, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, and this is not exhaustive, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but there's a lot of different pieces and areas of work from servers to clients to messaging. In fact, I think there's a smart messaging talk going on right now over there. FirePath, there's things like Smart, and we just saw Josh's talk about Smart and CDS hooks. There's CQL. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and Node actually has a lot off the shelf that you can use, or things that are being developed or emerging right now in these spaces. So in this talk, I was kind of overshot, and after looking at my slides, I kind of tried to scale back a bit. And some of this is things that you might have seen from some of the other talks, but I'm trying to focus today on showing off some JavaScript tools and Node tools for client messaging, a little bit of FirePath, and then kind of smart CDS hooks and a little library that implements some of the smart messaging stuff with CDS hooks. In the slide deck there, in the code repo, there's some examples of an early node-based mapping engine that does the FHIR mapping language, and then a kind of cool example that you can run on your own that does some streaming data with bulk data. So it pulls down the information, kind of streams it to standard out, but gives you an idea of how that can, Node's very good at operating with streams. So, and then after this talk, where there's another follow-up if we're not at if everyone hasn't left yet for the ice skating, where we're going to build a React Native app that will work in both your Android and iOS phones. And if you follow along in hands-on keyboard, you can even leave with a native app that you build today. So that would be kind of fun. So all the code's here. If you followed the link, you don't have to follow that link that was in that thing at the beginning. So I apologize for the screen. I didn't realize the screen is going to be like this when I first set up. So I have a rookie mistake, I guess. This is going to be maybe a little on the difficult side. I'm going to quickly mirror my screen because otherwise it's going to be really hard for me to get through this. Let me just go to arrangement and I'll mirror it, and then hopefully things will be a lot better. Okay, great. That is better. I'll zoom this in. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just kind of how at that, if you remember from that diagram that I just had up, we looked at what a FHIR client was kind of that first thing. And so this is a library that we developed, and we developed this a few years ago before the kind of new FHIR client library version 2 that the Smart group just put out. So I haven't used that in production, but I've used this library in production with a bunch of customers. So this is pretty well field tested, and I'd consider it production ready. And so one of the things that we're doing here, I'm just pulling it in, and this is like again, a notebook type of program. I guess the one caveat is this, you can call async functions in Node without having to put it through the function loop. It kind of makes that convenient for showing off code. So right here, I'm just creating a new instance of this FHIR client, and I'm giving it the base URL to the R4 Smart. I can maybe jump that up a little bit more to the, and I think this is a happy server behind the scenes that has some Cynthia data in it. So I'm just making a client object here. And the first kind of thing that this tool that I'm going over here is just interrogating the capability statement. So when and I'm not going to run all the cells because a lot of them have pre-run. But here's the capability statement kind of printed out in this debug console. So that might not be super interesting, but one of the things that we found when we develop apps, because we're primarily an app developer, is just like you have responsive design when you're building a web app where you might not know what size screen you have or what kind of device you're on. You kind of interrogate the device and then progressively enhance or remove features that the device doesn't allow. And the same pattern we found works quite well for building smart apps, because there is a lot of diversity in what the upstream FHIR server that we're connecting to can support. And so this library here has some nice helper functions where you can ask things like, does the server support history search or system search? Can I search for a patient, can I do a patch operation on a patient? And this last one here is, can I do a search care team by patient? And you can see these return Booleans. So in your app code, you could turn on and off certain features based on the capabilities of the system that you're connected to. Here's an example of creating a new resource. So this library supports all the various CRUD operations. And there's not really much going on here. And behind the scenes, this is a thin wrapper around a HTTP client that we've tested to work both on the LTS node and beyond on the server. It works in IE10 or later in the browser. It works nicely with React apps, with Angular apps, and it also works with React Native, and I can't remember the Angular native thing. That one, it also works. We had a bug report and made sure it worked there as well. So this tool works in a lot of different places for this client library. It also supports the ability to make a transaction. And if you're not familiar with how transactions work, it's a pretty nice part of the feature to be able to maintain the referential integrity within a bundle after it gets transacted by a system. And so here's like just a payload, and then the bundle that comes back is in here. And all the entries after you create it will have the identifiers that the FHIR server you're posting to creates. And here's the actual transaction response. So you can see up here the entry has a bunch of IDs that I made, and after I run the actual operation, the entries all get identifiers from the server I'm posting to. In this case, the R4 FHIR server. It supports search. One of the things that we had a request for and we added was the FHIR spec allows you to do a search using the post operation because the URL length can get very long, and I think it limits, I can't remember exactly how long, but there is a limit that servers might not allow if you are doing a large number of parameters or values that are repeating. So this, you can tout, there's an option, I don't have it in this example, but you can give it an option to execute the search as a post, and it will be the same type of response as if you didn't. The other thing that this library supports that's pretty nice is pagination. So a lot of times when you do a bundle, when you get a bundle, like a search result bundle, in this case I'm looking for observations and I'm including the patient that matches that ID. This is this supports, this is all promises, so you can use async await or kind of traditional Node or JavaScript style promises. I'm showing the kind of the promise chain here because this shows us doing the search query, getting the results, and then asking for the next page, and then the next page again. And then at the end, when I'm finally done, I put them all together to show you how long it is. And I can rerun this, but basically, this is pulling back the first page. This server happens to be configured for 50 results per page, so here it's getting 3 pages of data back, and then the final result is here. So I'm going to show one last feature of this library before moving on to some other of the tools in the Node ecosystem. Then this is reference resolution. And this was kind of an interesting thing to solve. What I want to do is bring up this code. Hopefully this is, maybe that's too big. Anyway, so this has an example of 4 kinds of reference resolutions. The first one I'm showing is the client was configured to talk to r4.smarthealthit. This is showing an absolute reference, so this is like referencing a resource that's not on the server that the client was instantiated with. The second one is, the third example is giving it a context of a bundle and resolving a reference to a resource that exists in the bundle, and we'll observe that it's not doing a network request. And then there's an example of when I give it a bundle, but I'm referencing something that isn't in there and how it does a web request. And then the last example here will be showing how it resolves a contained resource, which is anchor tag style reference within the parent resource. And so if I run this program, so the first one is an absolute reference, so I'll just press enter, and you can see here it's actually going out to the R3 server to get that patient that that I was referencing by a complete absolute URL. The second one here, I'm only doing patient slash the identifier, so it knows to get the one off the server that the client was configured to. This next one is a bundle that I gave it, and you'll see the name comes back instantly, and there's no debug output of doing a web request because in this case the patient was already in the bundle, so there wasn't a need to do a round trip. This use case coming up is when a bundle was given, so you have a search result, but there's something in the search result that was referenced that wasn't in that bundle, and so this will go automatically, the library knows to go to the server and try and grab that patient. And then the last one's kind of trivial. It's just a resource that's contained within the patient that it's referencing via the anchor tag style. So that's that tool, this set of features of this library was extremely important to us as we were building apps. We found that as we get references back, we needed a nice, robust way to resolve them. To switch gears a little bit, I don't know if anyone is doing a talk on FirePath. It seems pretty important, so maybe I missed it or it's coming up. But FirePath is kind of like, I think of it as kind of XPath-ish for Fire. And there's a FirePath library that's available. It's kind of under the, I think it's under the Smart group, but I might be mistaken. Here's a couple of examples of how it works. So in this first bit of code here, I'm just grabbing a patient from the server, and this first one, I'm issuing a FirePath where I'm just getting the first value of the patient's driver's license ID. So this URN is one that means a driver's license code system. And then the second one showing FirePath doing a concatenation operation. So I'm adding the string driver license plus value. And when I run those, you can see the output down here. And just to look at the patient identifier itself, you can see it has, this patient has 5 identifiers, one of which is, this one is the driver's license one that has that system. So FirePath is also a nice tool, and it also works just fine on the server using Node or in your web browser. Let's see. The next bit of things I wanted to show was, well, I showed FirePath. So I know that Josh went through some of this, so if you saw that, this is kind of a different take on the same thing that he showed in a way. So what's available on this GitHub repo you'll see in tranche 3 is a bunch of apps, example apps, and these are all also part of the FireKit client's example directory, and they show how using the client can be used within the context of Smart. So the library itself isn't Smart specific, so all these really just show you how to use the kind of Fire client that we just went over in an off-the-shelf OAuth 2 library to do the kind of OAuth dance part of it. And so the first one is simply a like kind of a standard launch, and so this is an Express app that's using session store just to maintain there's a bit of information I'll get into in a minute that gets maintained across the 2 endpoints that get hit. This is just setting up the session store. If you're familiar with Express and Express Session, you probably are familiar with this as well. So this little app has 2 endpoints. One is kind of the launch endpoint, and then the other is the callback. So this follows the standard Smart and Fire OAuth 2 process, which I'm not going to get into in detail since it's already been talked about by others. But the launch endpoint, you could see here, takes in a few parameters, the ISS and launch, and then uses the client library we just talked to get this metadata. So I guess the client does have one Smart utility function, which basically goes through the capability statement and pulls out the endpoints for doing the smart auth stuff. And I'm printing out some debug stuff. I'm storing the ISS in session. And then this is the stock kind of OAuth 2 module, simple OAuth 2 that's available on NPM. And it's really nice to be able to put together pieces of standard libraries to do things and not have to invent everything from scratch each time. So this is a standard workflow using OAuth 2, and then this is the redirect. It's using the authorization code OAuth 2 strategy. And then the callback basically does the upgrade for the code for the token, and then I'm just doing a simple request here where I'm reading the patient based on the patient that was in that token that I got back, and I'm just printing it out on the screen. And so if I run this, oops, I'm in the wrong directory. And as Josh was showing, we love, and I use this SmartLaunch tool like all the time. So in this case, I'm doing a very similar demo at this point to what we just saw, except a much less, it has no graph output. So I'm going to just select a patient, and down here I'm going to type in my launch endpoint as it was specified below. And as I go through this process, I can see it's simulating an EHR frame. This is a similar sign-in that we saw from the presentation before. And the code is just printing out the FHIR payload. And you can see, if you run this example yourself, you can interrogate these tokens. In this case, these are JOTs, so you can actually look at those at the JOT browser. So that's in a few lines of code, and the code that we looked at was exhaustively documented. So if you didn't need that much documentation, that can be done pretty painlessly. The other demonstration I wanted to do now, and I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'm just going to keep talking until the guy with the card puts it up. He's not here, so I guess I'll just keep talking. 8 minutes, okay. The other example I wanted to show is kind of a cool one. I worked with Dennis at 2 Connectathons ago on putting some conventions around the smart messaging that's kind of emerging as a standard. And so there's this library that you can actually use because GitHub has a CDN. So if and this is all in the presentation, these links, if you throw this in the script tag in the top of your favorite CDS hooks app, you can then use this kind of convention of creating a smart messenger object and dealing with the sending, and it deals with the correlation of putting the messages that come back and correlating those with ones that you've sent, because it's all asynchronous. And I want to demonstrate that using the oops, need that button. Demonstrate that again, launching from the Smart App Launcher. So I'm going to do CDS hooks this time. So the discovery endpoint is now a different URL. This follows kind of the CDS hooks standard. And then this will bounce me over to the CDS hooks sandbox. And in this case, my app that I'm running is this card. And I'll show you, we can review the code after I show you how the demo of it. So this, you can imagine, is the smart app that launches. Oops, that wasn't quite what I expected. And so one of the features of the CDS Hook sandbox is there's this message section down here. And so this app here, to simulate sending a message, oops, I wonder why that didn't work. Okay, I don't know why that was glitchy the first time, maybe because of all the amateur computering I was doing. So as I push this, you can see I'm getting messages back and forth using the post message protocol that's proposed as part of the smart messaging. And then this is a way to inform the parent that's launched your smart app of maybe putting draft orders in, or I'm done using the smart app, please close me, that sort of thing. And it's really a convenient part of the workflow. I've done some work on CDS Hooks tools. We worked for a company that distributes drugs, and some of those are cancer drugs, and we wrote some decision support tooling, and we kind of have the captive audience of being able to have both sides of the equation, i.e. the EHR developers were right next to us, so we were building a smart app and we would kind of go back and forth, but not having this be a standard, that was all kind of ad hoc code. So I'm very excited about the smart messaging because it really can make the interactions for the practitioner really, really nice. So I think I'm about out. I don't think I have time to go through some of these other demos. Well, I have until 20, right? So I have 4 minutes left. So why don't I go for it? I'll do the one last demo, which I think is pretty cool. This is the streaming demo. So this is a new standard coming out, the bulk data, and I'm sure there's lots of talks here about bulk data. But I wanted to show kind of an implementation using Node, because Node is very good at I/O and streams. This uses a few libraries. This uses Node Fetch, which probably most people are familiar with. There's an ND JSON library. Bulk data is in this new line delimited JSON form. I'm using kind of the built-in Node stream library. There's a little convenience wrapper, and then HyperQuest is this library that basically does HTTP requests, but treats them all as streams. So there's, without getting too deep into the spec, because I'm not quite frankly qualified for that, there's two effective phases. One is you ask a bulk data compatible server for, I'm interested in getting some files. The server then might take a while to create those files, and while it's doing it, you can ask it for progress and updates, and once it's done, it gives you a list of links to follow of where you can grab those files. So the first phase basically is just doing this kind of recursive wait for files, wait every 1 second, with like a sleep thing. And then where the interesting part here is after the files are ready, this pipeline using kind of, this is part of the Node Stream API, allows us to put these together so that the HTTP now is streamed for each of the files that's streaming through ND-JSON, which is the parsing tool that streams, and then through is that wrapper around stream that calls my write function, which is basically just grabbing the row ID, and then it's streaming to the standard out. So this is like streams all the way through, which Node is very good at. So I'm kind of excited about this standard emerging as well. And then this is just some administrative code to kick it off. So here's the trigger link. I guess I should mention, and I don't have time to really show it, but the same smart group has a nice bulk data simulator, so you can not only simulate how many records, but you can simulate errors just like the Smart Launcher. You can also simulate how long it takes to generate them, so you can test your apps. So this first thing waits for the files and then grabs all the URLs from the file and then puts it through that streaming thing above. And so if I run that, and this URL happens to have, I told the smart simulator to simulate 10 seconds of processing time to make the file, so you can see this is that first part. And now it's getting everything streaming, and I don't know if it's coming across there, but there's like all these things kind of streaming at once, so you can see all these things are flipping, and this is this would be really good. I wanted to maybe look at having these stream out to Parquet files, because I know that FHIR as a transactional store is great, but a lot of times the data science folks work in different tool sets. So I think there's a definite use case for kind of pulling bulk data out and throwing them into Hadoop, things like that. So that's pretty much it. I think in a few minutes there's a Let's Build that we're going to go through building a React app on your phone that you can. I have 10 minutes left. I have 10 minutes for questions. I also could go through another demo as well. If there's no questions, I'll go through another demo. No questions. I'll go through another demo. So the one that I didn't go through before was a very early library that we started writing and are in the process of writing called it's an implementation in Node of the FHIR mapping language. And so basically this is very early and supports only a few of the features of the library right now. So there's a couple of things it can do. It's not been battle tested at all. It's still highly in development, but it's also open. Everything here is open source, so pull requests are definitely welcome. So if I look at some of these, the code that runs, and so these are the tests for it. It allows for copying. So this is an example in the FHIR mapping language of copying the name to a target with the same attribute. And there's a few variations here. It also supports multiple sources and multiple targets, and you can alias them, and it keeps track of that as you apply rules to them. And it also can have dependents. So dependents mean that you might have two groups in your mapping rules, and you can reference from one group to the other. And it supports importing. So you can, there's this concept of having the ability in the mapping language to structure your rules so that ones can be imported from other ones. So the example I have here is simply it takes this map in, and this basically maps last name to family name, and then shows calling another map to map the address information over. And so if I run that, hopefully the output works. Right, so I'm showing the two maps up here, and I'm showing the output. And again, the outputs, it's assuming arrays or lists are inputs and outputs, because the mapping language can support more than one. So now I think I'm really done. Well, I guess in closing, the point of this talk was to really just point out that you know, there's a lot of tools and a lot of different language stacks, and there is a lot of work even at big enterprises. I mean, we have some of the larger customers in the States, and Node is definitely in TypeScript and React and Angular. Those are all tools that are becoming more and more popular, it seems like, as we're moving forward, and as those are getting better. And so there's definitely a lot of support for that in the community, and I hope that you got something out of this talk. I can't. Oh, hey, Reen.
Yeah, FirePath meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, you were asking.
Okay. Yep. So FirePath at 2. So I'm sure they will go into much more detail about what FirePath is all about.